The moment my sister grabbed the microphone at the family business anniversary gala, she declared, "If it wasn't for pity, no one would have invited you," as 180 guests fell silent. My name is Olivia Grant. I am 34 years old. At my own sister's big event, I hadn't spoken to most of my family in 11 years. That single cruel sentence from her with our father nodding in agreement hit me hard. That betrayal sparked something irreversible deep inside me that night. Before I tell you the full story, if family betrayal stories like this hit close to home, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I sat there at the back table near the kitchen doors, the one with the fake silk flowers and no real centerpiece, feeling every eye in the room on me. The invitation had come in a plain envelope with no return address, just my sister's handwriting asking me to be there for the Brooks Family Insurance 25th Anniversary Charity Gala. I drove 3 hours from my base near Dayton thinking maybe things had changed. They had not. 11 years earlier, I had left home with one suitcase and my acceptance to Air National Guard flight medic training. My father Henry had called me a disgrace that day, saying the family business was good enough for real people. My sister Isabella had stood there silent, watching me go without a word. Tonight she was the star about to be announced as the new vice president, and I was the pity guest. The cocktail hour dragged on with whispers following me like shadows. Cousin Marcus Reed, who had always enjoyed kicking someone when they were down, sidled up with a drink in hand. "Olivia, you actually showed up after everything some people just don't learn." His jab landed with that familiar smirk he shared with my sister. I smiled thinly and said nothing. My stepmother Eleanor floated by next, her voice sweet as poison. "Oh, Olivia, how unexpected! Still playing helicopter nurse? How quaint!" She laughed lightly and moved on before I could reply. The words stung, but I kept my posture straight the same way I did in the cockpit when turbulence hit. Then my colleague, Captain Lena Vargas, who I had asked to come as moral support, squeezed my arm. She was the one person who knew the real me from years of joint missions. "Ignore them," she whispered. "You pulled 14 people out of that flood last season alone. They have no idea." Her words helped, but the night was only starting. I could feel the tension building, like the calm before a storm when you know the wind is about to shift. My sister Isabella circled back with her fiancé Nathan Thompson on her arm, her eyes sparkling with that same old superiority. "You know, Olivia, some of us actually built something here while you were off playing hero. What do you even contribute besides fuel costs?" The cutting remark hung in the air, and Marcus leaned in to pile on. "Exactly. The real world runs on balance sheets, not salutes." I felt my jaw tighten, but I held my tongue. Years of rescue training had taught me when to wait for the right moment. Little did I know the evening was about to flip in ways none of them expected. My father watched from the head table, his silence louder than any shout, and I wondered how much more I could take before something broke. The band played on, but the real music was about to start with the speeches, and I had a feeling the next one would change everything. The lights dimmed slightly as the MC stepped up, and I caught Lena's eye across the table. She gave me a small nod, the kind that said she had my back no matter what came next. But as Isabella took the stage again for the official announcement, I felt the first real chill of the night. Something bigger than insults was coming, and I had no idea how far it would go or what it would cost me in the end. The crowd leaned in, glasses raised, and the tension in the room thickened like the air before a rescue call. I gripped my water glass tighter, waiting for the next blow. I gripped my water glass tighter, waiting for the next blow. And it came faster than I expected. My sister stepped fully into the spotlight on the small stage at the front of the ballroom, her voice ringing out clear and confident across the 180 guests. She adjusted the microphone with deliberate slowness, her eyes locking onto mine from across the room like she had been waiting for this exact moment for years. "Ladies and gentlemen." She began that familiar, superior tone dripping from every word. "Before we toast the 25th anniversary of our family business, I think it's time we address something important. Some people believe they can disappear for 11 years and then waltz back in like nothing happened. But let's be real. If it wasn't for pity, no one would have invited my sister here tonight." The room went dead quiet except for a few nervous coughs. My father sat at the head table nodding slowly, his face a mask of agreement, while my stepmother Eleanor leaned over to whisper to my uncle Victor Klein, who had slipped in late and taken a seat near the front. Victor, a retired accountant who had always sided with my sister in every family argument, gave a small chuckle that carried just far enough for me to hear. My colleague, Captain Lena Vargas, reached under the table and squeezed my hand, once her eyes wide with disbelief. She had flown in from our shared base near Dayton just to stand beside me, knowing how these nights usually went. But even she could not have predicted how quickly my sister would turn the entire evening into her personal stage for tearing me down. My sister kept going, her words sharpening like knives. "While the rest of us stayed here building something real, something that employs 75 people and supports this whole community outside Columbus, my sister chose to chase helicopters and headlines. What has that ever gotten anyone a lonely apartment and a uniform that doesn't pay the bills?" She paused for effect, letting the laughter ripple through the tables, where my cousin Marcus Reed and his wife Patricia Lang sat clapping politely. Marcus had always loved an audience, and tonight he was getting one at my expense. "I mean, come on!" My sister continued, her voice rising with mock sympathy. "Who shows up to a milestone gala in a dress that looks like it came from a discount rack? Some of us actually understand loyalty and contribution. Others just exist on the edges." The jabs landed one after another, each one crafted to remind everyone exactly where I stood in her eyes. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but kept my face calm the same way I did during emergency landings when the instrument screamed warnings. My Uncle Victor stood up then, raising his glass as if on cue. "To Isabella," he called out, "the true heart of this family, the one who never ran away from responsibility." My stepmother beamed beside him, and even Nathan Thompson, my sister's fiancé, joined in the toast, with a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. He had always been polite to me in private messages over the years, but here in the open he stayed silent, letting the wave crash over me. I glanced at Lena again, who mouthed the words, "Breathe through it." She was right. Years of flight medic training had taught me that panic only made things worse. But inside, something was shifting, a quiet resolve building, like the pressure before a storm front. Little did any of them know that 6 years earlier, during a flash flood that nearly wiped out the company's annual team retreat up near Lake Erie, I had been the one on duty. A company van carrying 7 employees, including my Aunt Rachel Simmons, the head of human resources, had been swept off the road into rising waters. Dispatch called my unit because we were the closest air rescue team. I went in alone after the first responder hesitated, pulling Rachel out first, then the others one by one in water so cold it numbed everything except the will to keep going. 196 lives saved in my career at that point, and Rachel had been number 112. She had never told the family who the anonymous medic was because I asked her not to. My sister had no idea that secret was about to surface or that tonight would force it into the light. The speeches continued, but the energy in the room had changed. My sister wrapped up her part by announcing her promotion to vice president, and the applause thundered. She stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward my table, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on every insult she had just delivered. "Enjoy the rest of the night, Olivia," she said softly enough for only our table to hear, but loud enough to sting. "Just remember this is my night. Try not to ruin it by playing hero again." Marcus laughed outright at that, and even my Uncle Victor gave a nod of approval from across the way. My father watched the whole exchange without a single word of correction, his silence the loudest approval of all. I stood up then, excusing myself to the ladies' room because I needed air that did not taste like betrayal. The marble hallway outside felt cooler, quieter, but my mind raced. Lena followed me out a moment later, her face serious. "That was low even for her," she said. "You do not have to stay. We can leave right now and grab burgers on the way back to base." I almost took her up on it. The thought of driving the 3 hours home in silence sounded like freedom. But something held me there, a stubborn thread of curiosity mixed with the old hope that maybe, just maybe, one person in that room would see the truth. I washed my hands slowly, staring at my reflection, the same face that had looked back at me after every rescue mission when the adrenaline finally faded. When I returned to the ballroom, the dessert course had started and the atmosphere felt thicker, heavier. My sister had moved on to mingling, but her eyes kept flicking back to my table like she was checking to make sure I stayed put. Then Rachel Simmons, my aunt, and the human resources director who I had pulled from that flooded van 6 years ago, stood up at the head table. She had aged gracefully, her silver hair catching the chandelier light, but her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the microphone. The room quieted again. I felt my stomach tighten because I knew that look in her eyes. She was about to speak, and whatever came next would either bury me deeper or flip the entire script. My sister noticed, too, her smile freezing for the first time all night as Rachel cleared her throat and began, "There is something I have kept quiet for far too long." The words hung there, suspended in the sudden hush, and I realized the night was far from over. One wrong sentence from Rachel could expose everything I had tried to leave in the past, and the fallout would not just affect my sister. It would change how every single person in this room saw the entire family. My heart hammered against my ribs as Rachel opened her mouth to continue the weight of 6 years of silence, finally breaking wide open right in front of everyone who had spent the evening laughing at my expense. I had no idea if I was about to be celebrated or destroyed, but one thing was certain. After tonight, nothing between me and my sister would ever be the same again. The words hung there, suspended in the sudden hush, and Rachel cleared her throat, her silver hair catching the soft glow from the chandeliers as she stood taller at the head table. "There is something I have kept quiet for far too long." She began, her voice carrying across the 180 guests with a quiet power that made every fork stop mid-air. 6 years ago, during our company team retreat up near Lake Erie, a flash flood swept our van off the road into rising waters. 8 of us were trapped inside the current pulling us under, and I was certain none of us would make it out alive. But a military rescue helicopter arrived on scene faster than anyone expected. The flight medic did not wait for the dive team. She jumped into the freezing water herself, pulled me out first with her own hands, then went back for the others one by one. When one of our group stopped breathing on the bank, she performed CPR alone in the pouring rain until the pulse returned. That medic saved every single one of our lives that day. And it was Olivia, my niece. The gasp that moved through the ballroom felt like a physical wave, table by table, breath by breath. head swiveled toward my back table near the kitchen doors. My father sat perfectly still at the head table, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. My stepmother Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her earlier smug smile wiped clean away. My sister rose halfway from her seat, her face draining of color as the weight of those words settled over her like a heavy blanket. "That cannot be right," my sister sputtered into the microphone she had grabbed back from the MC Stephen Hale, her voice cracking for the first time all night. "Olivia always makes herself sound more important than she is. She probably just happened to be in the area and took credit later. This is not the time or place for these stories." But Rachel was not finished. She held up a folded document with the official seal visible even from the back tables. "I filed the paperwork myself 2 years ago. The records confirm it. Olivia is the reason I am standing here today, the reason several of our longtime employees are still with the company. She has saved 196 lives in her career, including people in this very room, and for 6 years she never once asked for recognition or thanks from any of us." The room erupted into murmurs that grew into a low rumble. My colleague, Captain Lena Vargas, stood up beside me, her posture straight as she nodded once in confirmation. "I was her co-pilot on that mission," Lena said clearly, her voice carrying without needing the microphone. "Olivia went in first because she never waits when lives are on the line. She is the real deal." The energy in the room had flipped so fast it left my head spinning. Cousin Marcus Reed shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier laughter gone. Uncle Victor Klein looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the china. Even Nathan Thompson, my sister's fiancé, glanced at her with a flicker of uncertainty. But my sister was not about to let the moment slip away. She leaned into the microphone again, her tone sharpening like a blade. "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. My sister shows up after 11 years of silence, and suddenly we are supposed to rewrite history. She left the family to chase her own path, and now she wants applause for doing her job. Some of us stayed here and actually built something that supports 75 families in this community outside Columbus. That is real contribution, not some dramatic rescue story pulled out at the perfect moment to embarrass me on my night." Her words cut deep, laced with that same sarcasm she had used all evening, but this time they landed differently. A few guests shifted in their chairs, the applause that had almost started dying back into awkward silence. Then Derek Lawson, the company's new chief financial officer, who had been chuckling along with my sister during cocktails and had even joined in one of her jabs about my uniform earlier, suddenly clutched his chest at the table next to ours. His face went gray in an instant. He stood halfway, knocking over a water glass, and collapsed sideways onto the marble floor with a thud that echoed through the now silent ballroom. Patricia Lang, his wife, screamed. My stepmother screamed. Chairs scraped as people stood up in panic. I was already moving before my mind fully caught up, crossing the floor in seconds. Years of training took over. Male early 50s clutching chest, no pulse when I dropped to my knees beside him. "Somebody call 911 right now," I called out in the clear command voice I used in the air. "Is there an automated external defibrillator in the building?" A staff member sprinted toward the lobby. I positioned my hands, locked my elbows, and started compressions at 110 beats per minute, counting out loud the way I had drilled hundreds of times. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The man who had mocked my career less than an hour ago now had no heartbeat, and the only thing standing between him and death was the same hands my sister had just dismissed as worthless. Emma Caldwell, a longtime guest and local veterans liaison who had been sitting quietly at a side table and had nodded respectfully at me earlier in the evening, rushed over with the AED that had just arrived. "I know how to assist," she said calmly, tearing open the pads. We worked together seamlessly, the machine analyzing the rhythm, delivering a shock that jerked Derek's body. The monitor beeped, then flatlined again. I went back to compressions without hesitation. 30 more 2 breaths. Another shock. This time the rhythm stabilized, weak but present. Derek coughed, his eyelids fluttering open as I rolled him gently into recovery position. "Stay still," I told him softly. "Help is coming. You are going to be okay." His eyes met mine, filled with shock and something that looked a lot like regret. The paramedics arrived 4 minutes later, assessed quickly, and loaded Derek onto the stretcher. The lead medic looked at me, still kneeling there in my simple navy dress hands, steady from years of practice. "Whoever started this saved his life," he said with professional respect. Textbook response. "Are you medically trained?" I nodded once. "Flight medic with advanced cardiac life support certification." He gave me the nod professionals give each other and wheeled Derek out. The ballroom stayed silent except for the fading beep of the monitor and the sound of my own breathing slowing down. My sister stood near the stage, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. She grabbed the microphone again, her voice rising. Of course she had to turn this into her moment too. Even when it is supposed to be about the family business and my promotion, my sister finds a way to make it all about her rescues and her uniform. This is exactly why we stopped inviting her years ago. She cannot just let other people have their night. The words were sharp, laced with the same psychological jab she had used all evening, but this time the room did not laugh. A few guests murmured. Lena stepped forward, her eyes steady. Emma Caldwell stood beside her, adding quietly, "Maybe tonight showed us something different about contribution." But the shift felt hollow, temporary. My father remained seated, saying nothing. My stepmother busied herself with her napkin. The social physics had changed for a moment, but my sister's grip on the narrative was too strong, and the family orbit still spun around her. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on a napkin someone handed me. The crease in my dress from kneeling would not come out, but that was the least of it. I walked to the small stage, not because I wanted the microphone, but because staying silent now would mean accepting the role my sister had written for me, forever. I did not come here tonight for recognition or to steal anyone's moment. I said, my voice calm and even. I came because I was invited. I have spent 11 years serving people I will never meet again, pulling them from floods and wreckage, because that is what I chose. I would have served this family too if any of you had let me. But I see now that my place at this table, or any table connected to this family, has always been decided for me. So I am making the decision myself. I am done. No more invitations. No more attempts to fit into a story where I do not belong. I choose my own path, even if it means walking it alone. My sister stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "Good," she said into the microphone, the word dripping with finality. "Leave then. We never needed you here anyway." The applause that followed was scattered, uncertain, and died quickly. My father finally stood, but he only adjusted his tie and looked away. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the same controlled silence that had defined our family for 11 years. Lena and Emma walked me to the door, offering quiet support, but I knew even their kindness could not fill the space I was about to leave behind. I stepped out into the cool Ohio night, the parking lot lights casting long shadows across the asphalt. The drive back to my apartment near the base stretched 3 hours through empty highways lined with bare fields. The plain envelope invitation sat on the passenger seat next to the small note Emma had slipped me before I left a simple thank you from one veteran to another. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I simply drove the radio low, the darkness closing around the car like a quiet embrace. Home was no longer a place with my last name on the mailbox or photos on the wall. It was the quiet knowledge that I had finally chosen myself, even if that choice left me disconnected from everything I had once hoped to salvage. The family business would continue its anniversary celebrations without me. My sister would keep her title and her spotlight, and I would keep flying, saving strangers, living with the kind of peace that only comes when you stop waiting for people who never wanted you to stay. That night taught me the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes setting boundaries does not bring victory or closure or even understanding. It just brings silence, and you learn to make peace with the loneliness that follows, because the alternative is losing yourself completely. I have 196 rescues on my record now, and the most important one was the decision to save the version of me that no longer needed their approval. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from family to find your own peace, even when it left you feeling completely alone, drop your experience in the comments. I read every single one, and knowing I am not the only one helps more than you know. If this resonated, please like and subscribe for more real stories like this.